you just to think about those words that we just sung. I will call upon your name. Keep my eyes above the waves. I am yours, and you are mine. Think about that as I share with you from God's Word this morning. It's my privilege to do that. And we're looking at Mark chapter 6 this morning, our focus of Jesus walking on the water to the disciples who were encountering the storms. Coming from an island nation as I do, for Great Britain, as you know, is an island, you would think that I love the water. In fact, where my family still live and where I was raised, we were only about 40 miles from the ocean, and we would often go down to the ocean to play on the beach or to swim some, but I have never liked the water. I like it even less as an adult, for in 2001, both Janet and I were caught in a riptide in Florida and almost lost our lives, and so I rarely go in the water, occasionally on the water. Do I enjoy it? No. Our focus this morning is surrounding water because we're on the Sea of Galilee again. Mark chapter 6 introduces us, first of all, to the feeding of the 5,000, and then after that, it's centered upon this unusual event of the disciples struggling across the Sea of Galilee and Jesus going out to them. Much of what happened in the life and ministry of Jesus actually surrounded the Sea of Galilee. He either preached on it or close to it. For example, the Sermon on the Mount was preached on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Many of the miracles that Jesus did, and I mentioned the one that's in the gospel here in our reading, the feeding of the 5,000 was done in close proximity to the Sea of Galilee. And so much of what happened in the life and ministry of Jesus had water involved or was focused on or near the water. The key verse here in our reading this morning in Mark 6 is actually verse 45, and this is what we read. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida. Now, they'd got a plan. The feeding of the 5,000 had taken place, and their next port of call was going to be Bethsaida. But for some reason, Jesus wanted to delay his going. But he suggested that the disciples should go ahead of him. Why did they do that? Why did they leave Jesus behind? Well, first of all, because Jesus had asked them to do it. And they discovered in their lives already that if Jesus asked them to do something, it was always the right thing to do. That's a hard discovery to make sometimes, isn't it? When God asks us to do something, sometimes we may question it or wonder if it's the right thing to do. But with God, it's always the right thing to do. And the disciples had discovered that. But then they were going to fulfill the plans that had been made. As I said, they had planned to go to Bethsaida and have some ministry there and exercise, some teaching and some healing as well there. And so it was part of the plan, and they were just going along with the plan, Jesus wanting them to go earlier. But I believe another reason why they went, they recognized that Jesus needed some alone time. You know, alone time is good. I'm not sure whether you and I are aware of that. There are some people who struggle with being on their own, but I'm one of those people. I just love some alone time to be able to sit and think and pray. And that was where Jesus was, because Mark tells us that he went up to a mountainside to pray. Feeding of the 5,000 had been exhausting, and now he was going to take time on his own, so the disciples left. Now, the story is centered around this supposed storm that came up. Jesus was aware that the disciples were struggling out on the ocean. You know, the Sea of Galilee is an interesting place to be. There's going to be some pictures come on the screen. It's really an idyllic place, and when you look at this picture, you will notice it's surrounded by mountains and lovely blue water, but it's not a big ocean of water. For example, Janet and I were up in Illinois earlier in the week, and we took time just to go down to Lake Michigan. We were only about 3 or 4 miles from there. And I looked, and you would think you were at the ocean. You know, you can't see anything. It's about 100 or so miles across to Michigan, but we call it a lake. And really, I guess we should call Galilee a lake because it was surrounded by mountains and by land. And you can see on this geographical study here, it's not a big area of water, but it's a very violent one. And very quickly, storms can come. And you could start off on an evening cruise, as the disciples did, and suddenly you can encounter waves like this or even higher than this. And very often, they encountered these storms. These men, many of them fishermen, were used to it, but there were times even when they were fearful and when they were afraid. And what we're reading here in Mark chapter 6 is one of those incidences. So let me first of all talk to you about the storms. Look at verse 48. Jesus saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Now, that reveals to us just how rough it was at this moment. They only didn't have any motor power or any like that. The only way they could get across was manpower. And it was very difficult because they were rowing against the wind and the waves were against them as well. Let me talk to you for a few moments about this storm. First of all, it was completely unexpected. They were starting off on an evening cruise. It's going to be an idyllic time, boys, going across the lake. We're going to really love this. This is going to be easy tonight, when all of a sudden the unexpected happened. And Galilee was like that. And the Bible leads us to believe that when we come on the scene, the disciples were in a very tough situation. These seasoned fishermen were taken by surprise. But it was not only completely unexpected, it was severe and overwhelming. There were times previous when the disciples had been on the lake and they said, "Master, help us, we are going to perish." You remember that was the incident when he was asleep in the boat and not caring what was going on, and they had to wake him because they were sure they were going to die. This was probably very close to that as well. It was suddenly surprising and unexpected, but it was severe and overwhelming, and the storms on the Sea of Galilee were like that very often. But thirdly, it was also in control of the situation. They were wanting to get to Bethsaida. It seems as though the storm was not going to permit that. They wanted an evening idyllic cruise, but the storms were not going to allow that. The storms were in control of where they were and of what was happening. And these seasoned fishermen, as I said, were overwhelmed. Let me talk to you for a moment about the storms of life. Maybe some of you are in a storm at the moment. Might be a family situation. Might be a tough marriage that you're in. Might be to do with your job or something that's personal. But it's a storm, and you don't know what to do about it. It's come suddenly and unexpected. You didn't plan for this in your life. This was not part of the program that you were looking forward to in the future. But that storm has come suddenly and unexpected, and you don't know what to do about it. And it seems overwhelming. It's controlling your thinking. It's controlling everything that you do. It's even controlling your plans that you want to make for the future, because storms are like that. And when it's something personal, storms can be very controlling as well and not let us do or think or be the people that we want to do and think and be. So if you're encountering a storm this morning, don't be surprised. I need to tell you, storms come. We would love to think that life was easy and all smooth sailing. We would like to think we didn't have to encounter any problems or any difficulties. But I'll say to you, get real. Life isn't like that. God never promised that you would get through life without anything that you have to face that is challenging. It's in the midst of the challenges of life that we prove God. And that's what God is doing at the moment. I've learned in my life that no experience in life is wasted. We are the people we are because of what God allows, no matter how difficult it may be and overwhelming it may seem. So if you are encountering a storm this morning, listen up. It's part of life, but it's not the end of the story. That's why we move on here in Mark 6, and I want to share with you what I would call the reality. And in verse 48, this is what I read. Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by. Now, there are some interesting little things in here. Whenever I read a passage like this, I try to look for the unusual, and then when you do, sometimes I think, well, what it's about? What does it mean? And there are some unusual things here. It first of all says, Jesus saw the disciples. Now, where was Jesus when he saw the disciples? If you read the record, he was up in a mountain praying. So how did he see them? With his visible eyes? They were halfway across the Sea of Galilee. I think that's almost impossible. I believe he saw them with his spiritual eyes. You see, that's the wonder about Jesus. He knows what's going on in your life and my life. He sees it. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro over all of the earth, the scripture says. So he is perfectly aware of the storm. He was with these disciples. Once he saw them struggling with rowing, it says next, he went out to them. He never leaves us alone in the storms. He comes to where we are. And that's what he did for these disciples. But then, and here's an unusual statement, he was about to pass them by. He went because they needed him. He knew about the storm, and he went to be the one who would get on board. Why would he then pass them by? Was it to scare them witless? Because it certainly did that. The Bible says that they were terrified. They thought it was a ghost. I think that he did it so that they would realize the one who was coming on board was the master of the waves. The waves did not get on top of him. He got on top of them. And so it is with you and with me. Walking on the water. What was that really about? Well, first of all, let me tell you this. I believe it was to reveal his care and concern. You may be in the storm, experiencing the storms of life this morning. But he doesn't leave us alone to cope with them. Notice what Jesus said to the disciples. It is I. In other words, boys, fishermen, oarsmen, I'm here. It's me. Think of what that must have went. Boys, it's Jesus. We're okay. When you recognize he's part of the storms of life, then maybe it is going to be okay. Secondly, he demonstrated that he was in charge. You remember one time when Jesus stilled the storm, when he was on the boat and he got up and he stilled the waves. Do you remember what they stated? Who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him? Who is this man? This is God, the one who allows the storms, the one who allows the situations in our lives to develop, the one who allows the things that we don't understand to be part of our experience. It's God. And the one who allows them is thirdly the one who is in charge. But he also walked on the water to reveal his presence and his peace. Remember what he said to them? It is I, don't be afraid. Peace. Those words, don't be afraid. Do you know how important they are in the scriptures? Come from the same connotation as the word do not fear. 365 times in the Bible, God tells us, don't be afraid or do not fear. I preached a series of sermons in my last church in Kokomo on those promises, one for every day of the year. Gave my congregation every day a promise from the don't be afraid. You're going through the storms. You don't know what the outcome will be. You're scared to think about the future, worried what might come to pass. Jesus said, it's I. He comes walking on the water. He's in charge. He will be with you in the storms that you're going through. But the last thing I want to share you is what I've called the results. Verse 51. He climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. Never underestimate the power of those words. First of all, he climbed into the boat with them. My friends, he shares life's storms with us. He's on board. He's in the boat with you. He knows where you are and what's going on, and he is there beside you. You may be struggling getting across to the other side, but he's on board. He's no longer walking on the water, but he's on board the ship that is yours and that is being buffeted by storms. But notice what it says. He climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. Isn't it amazing? When God is on board, something happens to the storms. It doesn't necessarily mean that he calms the storms that you're going through, but he calms you. It doesn't necessarily mean that things will automatically and immediately resolve themselves. Sometimes they do, but if they don't, he will help you resolve the way that you handle it, and he will get you through. Notice one or two things about the remedy. First of all, he took charge of the situation. He took charge of the wind and the waves and calmed it. He came on board their vessel and he calmed their fears. He got into the boat with them and he joined in the situation. For you this morning, God is in charge. God is in charge of where you are and of what's going on in your life. It says, secondly, that he stilled the storm. Once on board, the wind ceased. His presence brings calm. When you and I realize in the midst of life's difficulties, we're not alone, that the one who said, I'm with you always, is actually there beside you, then he'll bring calm in the midst of the storm. It's amazing, isn't it? You can look back and you wonder how you got through some of life's situations, but in the end, you know it was him. He was there, walking with you, sitting in your boat, sharing the words, don't be afraid. And the third thing I noticed was that he got them to the other side. It says in verse 53, when they got across to the other side. You know, the amazing thing about God is he always gets us through to the other side. This morning, you may not know how. You may not even deem it's possible. You may think that where you are is where you're going to sink and where you're going to drown. No. He'll get you across to the other side. One of my favorite verses in the Old Testament are the words of Isaiah chapter 43. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. For an Englishman who loves to roll his R's, the operative word 3 times is the word through. What does that mean? Where you are is not where you're going to stay. He will get you across to the other side. And I have to tell you this morning, the storm that you're in and the experiences that you're going through and the overwhelming situation that you've encountered is not going to stay. I can't tell you how long it's going to last, but I know you're going to get through because that's the promise of God. He will not allow your vessel to sink, but he will take you eventually to the other side. I celebrated my birthday on July the 10th. And that afternoon, we had to go to Zion, Illinois, to the Cancer Center of America for Chicago. It was my annual check. I had kidney cancer 4 years ago and had to have my right kidney removed as a result of that cancer. And once a year in July, I go for my annual check. The journey up was relatively easy, and we were chatting away about birthdays and Victoria going to med school and all of that fun stuff. Next morning, I had to have a CAT scan and then see the oncologist, get the all clear for another year, and we would make our way the 5-hour journey back to Franklin. We were absolutely astonished when he told me that I had got a secondary cancer of my right lung, but they did not know where the primary was, so they needed to investigate to find it. And we sat there, didn't know what to say, and he said, we'll arrange for a biopsy, a PET scan, and then you'll come to see me and we'll decide what treatment or whatever is necessary. So you can imagine the journey home on the 11th was not a pleasant journey, a very difficult one. A week ago on Friday, I was back at the hospital having a biopsy on my right lung, and I'll tell you just from personal experience, that's not pleasant, but I had to have it done anyway. We came home that evening to go back again on Wednesday. We drove up Tuesday night, ready for a PET scan on Wednesday, and then to see the oncology team as to what was happening. So this last Wednesday, the journey up was very difficult. What do we do if it's this and this and this? How do we handle the future and so on, with surgery possibly and all of that? When we got there, my phone was in the back of the car. We were in Janet's car, so it wasn't on Bluetooth. When we got there, I looked at my phone, and I'd missed 2 messages. The first one was a voicemail that said, your biopsy was negative. Oh, my word, how I rejoiced on hearing that, because it meant there was no primary cancer anywhere. So whatever was going on in my lung didn't really matter. I could handle that. And then I thought, well, we've made all of this journey for nothing, but we really didn't. I didn't have to have the PET scan. I didn't have to see the oncology team. I have to go back every 2 months for tests and things just to keep a check on things. But the journey home on Wednesday was a journey of praise. The storm had calmed, and God had answered prayer. Why did he do that for me? I don't know. I'm undeserving. I guess he still has something for me to do, but I will tell you, yes, life is a roller coaster ride. Sometimes it can be very, very difficult, but I've discovered again, my God is in control of everything and anything that happens to us, a reason and a purpose. And you may be encountering the storms at the moment, but God's on board. Trust him. He's not going to let you down, because he is God, and he's God of the storms. Let's